Deep beneath the shifting dunes of the Iraqi desert lies a ghost that refuses to stay buried. A name that has echoed through 4 millennia, whispered in terror, in envy, and in awe. Imagine a city so wealthy that its very walls were rumored to glow like the heavens themselves. A place where the streets were paved with the ambitions of kings and the sky was pierced by a tower that dared to look the gods in the eyes. This was Babylon, the jewel of Mesopotamia, the richest, most decadent, and most powerful metropolis to ever grace the face of the earth. But there is a dark paradox hidden in the dust. A secret that challenges everything you were taught about the dawn of civilization and the rise of empires. How is it possible for a city to become a legend and turn into ruins before its real foundations were even laid? To find the truth, we must peel back the layers of blood and gold. We must look past the shimmering gates and into the eyes of the men who built it, destroyed it, and then tried to resurrect its corpse. History tells us of the Hanging Gardens, a wonder of the world so beautiful it seemed to defy the laws of nature. We hear of Hammurabi, the man who brought an iron fist of justice to a lawless world. But the ruins you see today, the ones studied by scholars and photographed by explorers, are a magnificent lie. They are a golden mask covering a scar that history tried to heal, but could never quite hide. Centuries before the Babylon we recognize reached its peak, there was another city. A city so powerful it became a target for total annihilation. There was a king from the north, consumed by a cold, suffocating rage. He didn't just want to defeat Babylon in battle. He wanted to commit a crime against memory itself. In the year 689 BC, he ordered his soldiers to do the unthinkable. They didn't just loot the treasures. They systematically dismantled the homes of the wealthy and the hovels of the poor. They smashed the sacred statues of the gods and dragged the divine protectors of the city through the dirt like common criminals. But even that was not enough to satisfy the king's hunger for destruction. He ordered his engineers to dig into the earth until not one stone rested upon another. And then he did something that would haunt the region for eternity. He diverted the path of a mighty river to flood the scorched remains. He turned the gate of God into a silent, underwater grave, hoping the mud and the reeds would swallow the legend forever. The world thought Babylon was gone. They thought the name would be forgotten. But they underestimated the power of a ghost that refuses to sleep. How did a city that was completely erased rise from the depths to become the most famous metropolis in human history? Why did the greatest builders of antiquity obsess over a graveyard cursed by the blood of its own citizens? Today we journey back 4,000 years into the heart of the cradle of life. We will walk through the cobalt blue gates of Ishtar and stand in the shadow of the real Tower of Babel. We will uncover the chilling laws that govern the lives of millions, where an eye was traded for an eye and a life for a life. We will witness the opulence that drove men to madness and the pride that brought gods to their knees. We will finally solve the mystery of the city that lived twice. A city that was more advanced than Rome, yet more dead than dust. The gold is gone, the kings are bones, and the gardens are a beautiful mystery. But the truth of what happened in those streets is far more terrifying than any myth. Everything you think you know about the richest city in history is about to change. Welcome to the forbidden truth of Babylon. Deep beneath the shifting dunes of the Iraqi desert lies a ghost that refuses to stay buried. A name that has echoed through 4 millennia, whispered in terror, in envy, and in awe. Imagine a city so wealthy that its very walls were rumored to glow like the heavens themselves. A place where the streets were paved with the ambitions of kings and the sky was pierced by a tower that dared to look the gods in the eyes. This was Babylon, the jewel of Mesopotamia, the richest, most decadent, and most powerful metropolis to ever grace the face of the earth. To understand the true weight of Babylon, we must travel back to a time when the world was young and the rules of humanity were still being written in the mud. Between the pulsing veins of the Tigris and the Euphrates, a miracle was born out of the sun-scorched dust. This was the Fertile Crescent, a strip of land where life fought a constant war against the desert. But here, the mud was not just dirt. It was the gold of the ancient world, the foundation upon which the first true empire would be carved. Babylon did not begin as a city of marble and gold, but as a small, humble port on the banks of the river. It was a place where merchants traded grain for timber, and where the first dreams of a global center began to take root in the minds of ambitious men. But as the centuries passed, the humble port transformed into a pulsating heart of commerce. It became a magnet for every traveler, every dreamer, and every conqueror from the Mediterranean to the mountains of Persia. The air in Babylon smelled of exotic spices, expensive oils, and the heavy scent of burning incense from 1,000 altars. It was a city that never slept, a labyrinth of brick and bronze where the wealth of nations flowed like the water of the great river. At the center of this rising storm stood a man whose name would become synonymous with justice and iron-fisted rule, Hammurabi. He looked upon a world of chaos and decided that a city of such immense wealth needed a backbone of steel. He did something that had never been done on such a scale before. He wrote the destiny of his people into pillars of black stone. These were the laws that turned a collection of houses into a civilization, ensuring that the strong could not simply devour the weak. Under his gaze, Babylon became the world's first true metropolis, a place where order met opulence. But wealth on this scale acts as a beacon, drawing in the darkness from the edges of the known world. The city's riches were legendary, whispered about in the courts of distant kings who could only dream of such splendor. It is said that the gold within the temple of Marduk alone was enough to buy entire kingdoms, shimmering with a light that blinded those who dared to look upon it. But there is a dark paradox hidden in the dust. A secret that challenges everything you were taught about the dawn of civilization and the rise of empires. How is it possible for a city to become a legend and turn into ruins before its real foundations were even laid? History tells us of the hanging gardens and the iron fist of justice. But the ruins you see today, the ones studied by scholars and photographed by explorers, are a magnificent lie. They are a golden mask covering a scar that history tried to heal, but could never quite hide. Centuries before the Babylon we recognize reached its peak, there was another city. A city so powerful it became a target for total annihilation. The great kings of the north, the fierce Assyrians, looked upon Babylon with a burning, suffocating jealousy. They saw a city that claimed to be the gate of the gods, and they decided that those gates needed to be torn down. In the year 689 BC, King Sennacherib ordered his soldiers to do the unthinkable. They didn't just loot the treasures, they systematically dismantled the homes of the wealthy and the hovels of the poor. They smashed the sacred statues of the gods and dragged the divine protectors of the city through the dirt like common criminals. But even that was not enough to satisfy the king's hunger for destruction. He ordered his engineers to dig into the earth until not one stone rested upon another. And then he did something that would haunt the region for eternity. He diverted the path of a mighty river to flood the scorched remains. He turned the gate of God into a silent, underwater grave, hoping the mud and the reeds would swallow the legend forever. The world thought Babylon was gone. They thought the name would be forgotten. But they underestimated the power of a ghost that refuses to sleep. How did a city that was completely erased rise from the depths to become the most famous metropolis in human history? Why did the greatest builders of antiquity obsess over a graveyard cursed by the blood of its own citizens? Everything you think you know about the richest city in history is about to change. Welcome to the forbidden truth of Babylon. Out of the sun-baked silence of the marshes, the sound of 1,000,000 hammers began to echo once more. King Nebuchadnezzar too did not just want to restore Babylon. He wanted to build a fortress of the soul that would never again be erased from the earth. He looked at the mud and saw marble. He looked at the scars of the past and saw a canvas for the most expensive dream ever conceived by a mortal man. Under his command, the city didn't just rise, it exploded into a symphony of cobalt blue and shimmering gold. Imagine standing before the Ishtar Gate, a structure so blue it looked as if a piece of the midnight sky had been pulled down to the ground. Thousands of glazed tiles, glowing with the intensity of a dying star, depicted dragons and bulls that seemed to breathe in the flickering torchlight. This was the ultimate psychological weapon. Before a visitor even entered the city, they were forced to realize that they were small, insignificant, and entirely at the mercy of a power that could command the colors of the heavens. But the true wealth of Babylon was not just in its walls, it was in the impossible. Nebuchadnezzar looked at his queen, a woman pining for the green mountains of her childhood, and decided to challenge the very laws of nature. The Hanging Gardens were born from this obsession. A mountain of stone and soil rising in the middle of a flat, burning desert. A forest that floated in the air, fed by hidden machinery that defied the gravity of the ancient world. Historians still argue if they truly existed or if they were a collective fever dream of a world blinded by Babylonian opulence. But the myth itself tells us everything we need to know about the city's spirit. Babylon was a place where enough was a word that didn't exist. To live there was to be surrounded by a luxury so heavy it felt like a burden, a golden cage where every brick was cemented with the sweat of 100 nations. Deep within the city's heart, the Edamananki, the true Tower of Babel, pierced the clouds. It was a ziggurat of terrifying proportions, a stairway to the gods that reminded every citizen that their king walked among the stars while they walked in the dust. The air was thick with the scent of burning cedar and the roar of the crowds in the markets. You could find anything in Babylon: silk from the Far East, spices that cost more than a man's life, and slaves whose tongues had been cut out to ensure the secrets of the palace remained silent. But there is a chilling darkness that accompanies such blinding light. The richer Babylon became, the more paranoid its heartbeat grew. The laws of Hammurabi were still carved in stone, but they had taken on a sharper, more desperate edge. Justice in the richest city was a brutal, mathematical equation. If a house collapsed and killed the owner's son, the builder's son was executed in return. It was a society built on the terrifying balance of a life for a life, a tooth for a tooth. Behind the golden masks and the silk veils, the city was a pressure cooker of ambition and fear. The wealth was a magnet, yes, but it was also a target. Every neighboring kingdom watched from the shadows, their eyes reflecting the glow of Babylon's fires. The people feasted while the world outside starved. They drank from golden goblets while the foundations of their empire began to crack under the sheer weight of their own arrogance. We often think of Babylon as a paradise lost, but for the millions who labored in the shadow of the blue gates, it was a beautiful nightmare. A place where you could become a king in a night or a corpse by dawn, all for the price of a single gold coin. The tragedy of Babylon is that it forgot the lesson of its own first destruction. It believed that gold was stronger than steel, and that walls could keep out the inevitable rot of time. As the sun set over the Euphrates, casting long, bloody shadows across the Hanging Gardens, the city looked immortal. But the ghosts of Sennacherib's victims were still there, waiting in the mud, whispering that what the river gives, the river eventually takes back. The stage was set for the final act. The wealth was at its peak, the pride was absolute, and the fall. The fall would be so spectacular that it would echo through the scriptures of every religion for the next 3,000 years. But before the end came, there was a moment of perfect, terrifying silence. A moment when Babylon sat at the center of the universe, unaware that the very ground it was built on was already starting to shift. The final night of the world's most magnificent city did not begin with the sound of trumpets, but with the clinking of golden chalices. King Belshazzar, the heir to Nebuchadnezzar's pride, threw a banquet so massive it seemed to mock the very idea of mortality. Inside the palace, the air was heavy with the scent of roasted meats and the sweat of 1,000 dancers. The elite of Babylon drank from the sacred gold vessels stolen from the temples of conquered nations, laughing at the rumors of an army gathering in the darkness outside. They believed they were safe behind walls so thick that 2 chariots could race side by side along their tops. They believed the Euphrates River, which flowed directly under the massive city gates, was a moat that no human force could ever cross. But as the wine flowed and the music reached a fever pitch, the laughter suddenly died in 1,000 throats. A ghostly, disembodied hand appeared in the flickering torchlight, tracing glowing letters into the plaster of the palace wall. The king's knees knocked together in terror as the wise men failed to decipher the celestial script. It was a message from the void: Min tekel upharsin. Your kingdom has been weighed in the balance and it has been found wanting. While the Babylonian royalty trembled at the writing on the wall, The Persian king Cyrus was busy performing a miracle of engineering in the mud. He did not try to scale the walls or batter down the bronze gates. Instead, he attacked the very lifeblood of the city. Thousands of Persian soldiers worked in the silence of the desert night to dig a massive trench, a wound in the earth that would change the course of history. They diverted the flow of the mighty Euphrates into a dry basin, watching as the water level that protected the city began to drop inch by agonizing inch. The gate of God was suddenly left vulnerable, not from above but from below. As the river bed turned into a path of wet silt and drying reeds, the Persian army waded silently into the heart of the capital. They moved like shadows through the mud, entering the city while the revelry inside reached its final desperate peak. By the time the first cry of alarm echoed through the streets, it was already too late. The invincible city, the jewel of the ancient world, was taken without a massive siege. It fell into the hands of its enemies while its leaders were still drunk on their own arrogance. Babylon did not burn to the ground that night, but its spirit was severed. The crown of the world was passed to a new empire, and the city that once commanded the sun began its long, slow descent into the shadows of the past. Years later, Alexander the Great would try to restore its glory, dreaming of making Babylon the capital of his own global empire. But the city seemed to carry a heavy, invisible weight that no conqueror could lift. Alexander died within its very walls at the age of 32, his dreams of a new Babylon dying with him. It was as if the city itself refused to be owned by any man ever again. Slowly the people began to leave. The grand canals that once fed the hanging gardens became choked with salt and sand. The blue tiles of the Ishtar Gate began to flake and fall, buried by the relentless march of the Mesopotamian dust. The city that lived twice was finally being consumed by the only thing it couldn't bribe or outrun: the silence of the desert. The great temples crumbled into shapeless mounds, and the stairway to heaven became a haven for jackals and scorpions. For centuries, the richest city in history was nothing more than a ghost story whispered by nomads. Its treasures were looted, its bricks were stolen to build the houses of commoners, and its very location became a mystery hidden beneath the burning sun. Today we look at the ruins and see the ultimate warning. Babylon proves that no matter how high we build our towers or how much gold we hoard, the river of time eventually dries up for everyone. The forbidden truth is that Babylon never truly died. It simply moved into our blood. Every time we build a metropolis that reaches for the clouds, or create a law that demands a life for a life, we are walking in its shadow. The gold is gone, the kings are dust, and the gardens are a beautiful lie. But the name of Babylon still rings through the ages, a golden monument to the terrifying beauty of our own ambition. The winds of the Iraqi desert still carry a faint, metallic echo, a sound like 1,000 gold coins hitting a marble floor, muffled by the weight of 4,000 years of dust. If you stand amidst the silent ruins of the Ishtar Gate today, you don't just see broken bricks and parched earth. You see the remains of a dream that was simply too big for this world to hold. Babylon was the first city to prove that humanity could conquer the elements, but it was also the first to prove that time is a predator that cannot be bribed. It wasn't the Persians, the Greeks, or the heat of the sun that truly killed the jewel of Mesopotamia. It was the suffocating weight of its own golden chains. The paradox of Babylon is that its greatest strength, its absolute, blinding wealth, was the very thing that made its destruction inevitable. We look at the crumbling mounds of the Edamananki and we tell ourselves that we are different. We look at the vanished beauty of the hanging gardens and we believe we have learned the lessons of the past. But the ghost of Babylon is not found in the museums of Berlin or the sands of Hilla. It is found in our modern skyscrapers, in our digital empires, and in our obsession with building monuments that scream our names into the void. Every time a civilization reaches for the stars while ignoring the rot at its foundations, a brick in the spiritual wall of Babylon is laid once again. We are all children of that ancient, decadent dream. The laws of Hammurabi may no longer be carved on black diorite in our town squares, but the rhythm of an eye for an eye still beats in the heart of our systems. We are still obsessed with the mathematics of justice and the accumulation of power. The tragedy of the richest city in history is not that it fell, but that its fall was so beautiful that we have never stopped trying to recreate it. We are still building towers to talk to gods who aren't listening. We are still diverting rivers of wealth to feed gardens that will eventually wither in the heat of a changing world. Babylon is not a place on a map. It is a fever that takes hold of a species when it forgets its own mortality. Think about the streets you walk today. Think about the neon lights that glow like the rumored walls of Nebuchadnezzar's palace. Are we building something that will last, or are we just preparing the next magnificent corpse for history to study? The gold of the Temple of Marduk is gone, melted down and scattered into the bloodlines of a dozen forgotten empires. The blue tiles of the gate are cold, and the hanging gardens are a whisper that might have been a lie. But the warning remains, carved into the very air of the desert. Wealth can buy you a throne, it can buy you a wall, and it can even buy you a legend, but it can never buy you a way out of the cycle of dust. If this journey into the dark heart of the ancient world has changed the way you look at the cities of today, then perhaps the ghost of Babylon has finished its work. The truth is always buried deeper than the gold. Do you believe that we are currently living in the peak of a new Babylon, or have we already begun the slow, silent slide into the mud? Tell us in the comments what you think is the true legacy of the world's first metropolis. If you crave more forbidden truths and want to walk the halls of history's most dangerous secrets, make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell. There are many more ghosts waiting to be unearthed. The desert is vast, and the stories hidden beneath the dunes are far from over. Until next time, remember, the river always returns to its bed and the silence always wins in the end.